Breaking news story we're tracking for you at this hour. The National Prosecuting Authority has just announced it will prosecute members of the Soweto Special Branch for a murder that took place in 1983. Nokuthula Simelane was an ANC underground operative. She was kidnapped by members of the Soweto Special Branch. Let's get a bit more detail on this. We're joined by Karen Morn. Karen, thanks very much for coming in. So we have some idea of the background around this. Just fill us in on the details in terms of what we know Nokuthula Simelane suffered shortly before her demise.
Well, we know that she was kept in custody for at least a week and her body was never ever found, which was what makes this completely exceptional situation. But we know that from what came out in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, in which 3 of the men who will appear for her murder on the 26th of February actually asked for amnesty for her kidnapping, that she was subjected to a very brutal and prolonged assault. And as in the cases of so many of the people suspected by the police of being ANC operatives, they wanted information from her and therefore subjected her to sustained torture and assault for several days before she is believed to have died. Of course, the members of the special forces that appeared for asking for amnesty never really acknowledged that in fact she had died, and at this stage we don't know where her body is.
I want to ask you at this point how easy this case is going to be for the NPA to follow up on and fight in court. I mean, it happened a very long time ago. Evidence surely must be scant by this stage.
I don't think we can possibly underestimate how important this latest move by the NPA is. I mean, we've seen scenarios in which Eugene de Kock and people like Ferdinand Barnard, Clive Derby Lewis were prosecuted for apartheid era crimes. But many, and if not the vast majority of murders committed during the apartheid era by the police, those police operatives were given amnesty by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And we have never seen a situation where decades after the fact, of course, this murder is believed to have taken place in 1983. The NPA is now choosing in 2016 in democratic South Africa to prosecute members of the police for murder. It has massive implications. We don't really know at this stage what the basis of the prosecution will be. They don't have a murder. They don't, strictly speaking, know what cause of death was. We don't know what evidence they have available to them, whether they have people who witnessed the killing, who will come forth and give that information. And we know that even in scenarios where murders or crimes took place, a year before or weeks before or months before, the difficulties faced by witness evidence, you also have no body, so you don't have that crucial pathological information. The fact that they are doing this is a very brave decision on their part, and it will come in the weeks or months to come to really see what evidence they have to prove their case.
Let's in fact ask them right now, Karen. Stay right where you are, because joining us on the line is Vuyo Mfaku from the National Prosecuting Authority. Vuyo, thank you very much for joining us on the line right now. On what grounds have you decided to go ahead with these prosecutions?
We have decided to prosecute on the basis that when they applied for amnesty, they only applied for amnesty on the basis of for kidnapping only. They never applied for amnesty for murder, and therefore a decision was taken after extensive interrogation of the evidence at our disposal. And you must recall that the decision to prosecute, we do not take it lightly. It is a very serious discretion, and therefore we know that it affects families, it affects the accused people. Therefore we do not take the decision to prosecute willy-nilly.
Are you able to tell us exactly who you will be prosecuting?
It's 4 members of the former Soweto Special Branch. At this stage, we are not at liberty to give their names because they have not appeared in court. Once they appear in court on the 26th, then their names will be divulged.
Vuyo, as our reporter Karen Morn has just pointed out, this is going to be a particularly difficult crime for you to prosecute. We know there's no body, there's no proof at the stage of murder. We know that witnesses may not be available this number of years after the crime that was thought to have been committed all that time ago in 1983 actually took place. Do you think you're going to have enough evidence to secure any kind of conviction?
When we took the decision to prosecute, we were mindful of all those factors. But because of the evidence at our disposal, we firmly believe that the matter is prosecutable. You must recall that we've got precedent where a conviction was secured. If you still recall the Nkuna matter where the body was not recovered, but we secured a conviction. So there's a precedent for that.
Vuyo, how has Nokuthula Simelane's family responded to this news?
I don't want to engage on issues relating to the family. If you actually want to get the sense of how they actually take the news, it will be advisable to engage them, not with us.
Can you give us a sense of whether the NPA is now open to the idea of perhaps starting to open up more of these apartheid-era investigations and trying to give families closure through the courts?
You must recall people were given an opportunity through the PRC to come forward and divulge what happened to activists. And then those who came forward and disclosed everything, they were given amnesty. Now, if you have fully disclosed and you're not granted amnesty, if there is evidence that the matter, there are prospects of a successful prosecution, we'll obviously decide to prosecute. But if there are no prospects, we won't institute any prosecution.
Why have you decided to go ahead with this prosecution now?
We decided after extensive investigation, you've alluded to the fact that the matter happened in 1983, you get into an in-depth investigation, and you have to get opinions within the NPA. We bounce ideas. We don't take this decision. We didn't take it willy-nilly. We bounce ideas. We engage different teams to look at the matter, to check whether we have prospects of a successful prosecution. Then a decision was, let's proceed with the matter because we have reasonable prospects of a successful prosecution.
The reason I was asking about whether the NPA is open to more prosecutions of this kind is that most recently we've heard about a possible complaint or charges being brought against Adrian Vlok and F.W. de Klerk as former members of the apartheid machinery who received amnesty for some crimes before the Truth and Reconciliation but did not receive amnesty for others. Are you open to prosecuting those two individuals, among others perhaps whose names may come forward?
When a docket is presented to us and we look at the docket and the evidence contained in the docket warrants a prosecution, we will prosecute. But at this stage, we cannot actually talk on those matters because we have not received any dockets that relate to those matters.
Vuyo Mfaku, thank you very much for talking to us about this story. He is, of course, the National Prosecuting Authority spokesperson. Back to Karen Moore in studio with us. So there you have it, Karen. We did talk about how difficult this crime would be to prosecute, but Vuyo giving us an example there of the mortal remains or the evidence of the mortal remains not being essential in order to secure conviction.
And I don't think we can underestimate the kind of level of trauma and loss of family members of people who were subjected to the abuse and torture and violence of the apartheid regime, and who, in many instances, as in Nokuthula Simelane's family's case, never even got the opportunity to bury and put their loved ones to rest. And I think it is a brave decision. One would hope that Vuyo Mfaku is correct in saying that the NPA does believe it has the evidence that it needs to secure a conviction. And one would hope that in this court process, at least, the family will have the possibility of finding out what happened to their loved one and finding out where her remains are, and they can finally have that closure, because her family is representative of hundreds, if not thousands, of other families who never got those answers.
Yeah, it's interesting. We often think of the TRC process as one that ended a long time ago, but of course they're very competent forensic investigators like Madeleine Fuller and the like who continue with those investigations in order to give these families closure, don't they?
And I mean, we recently, just a few months ago, we did the story of Ahmed Timur's family, who, of course, the police claimed had killed himself by throwing himself out of the 10th floor of the building at John Foster Square, the police station. And the family now now saying that that inquest needs to be reopened, that information needs to come forward, because they believe that he was tortured to death and that this apparent suicide story was merely a mechanism that the police utilized to avoid taking responsibility for his death. Of course, Thabo Mbeki famously saying that he was a person on whom the apartheid-era police attempted to carry out an exorcism of violence. And there are many people for whom, there were definitive attempts by the apartheid-era police to torture information out of, and that is the belief for Nokuthula Simelane's family. And it will be fascinating to see how they respond to this news.
Well, it's very interesting that this also coincides with a time in society when the country is looking back on its past and saying there are too many ghosts we're haunted by that were supposed to have been vanquished, shall we say, during the time of reconciliation and the new dispensation, that simply weren't. Is this going to be a trend that the NPA is setting, with going back to those cases, revisiting them and trying to solve them?
Undoubtedly, there was critique of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that, it didn't do enough to really grapple with the full horror and extent of the crimes that were committed by the apartheid-era police. And I honestly believe they did the best that they could. But the failure to really take people to account who perpetuated gross and despicable crimes, I think has left its scars on the country. And one would hope that this kind of prosecution, if it is rightly and fairly brought with the evidence backing it, will help to lay some of those ghosts to rest.
Karen Morn, keep watching that story for us. Thanks very much for that comprehensive explanation. Our reporter Karen Morn, more of the day's top stories when Afternoon News continues.